what would you say right now are the biggest misconceptions about cloud security?
That's a great question. And if you were to ask me this question 6 years ago, I would probably say the biggest misconception is cloud is not secure. That now has evolved more to how do I not get into multi-cloud situation? It's like it's a misconception because everyone's gonna go into multi-cloud. Especially if you're a big organization, you would either land in a multi-cloud situation or you would land in a hybrid situation. You would
Hmm.
land in a hybrid situation if you don't have enough compute for some of the hardware that you use. Like I'm thinking of the banks, which is like a fintech company. If you have mainframe, a mainframe cannot be moved onto a cloud. That just we don't have the enough compute for it, and there might be some time before there's compute for it. So that's one misconception where people assume that they would never go multi-cloud. I was one of them as well, which is why that was the first thing that came in my mind, because initially I used to say, why would you go into AWS and Google Cloud and Azure? But unfortunately, that's the reality now, because if I can add a few more layers to this, every organization would have different requirements, and each of these cloud providers are good for certain things. Like you would use AWS when you're thinking infrastructure as security. Sorry, infrastructure as a service is when you would think of AWS. When
Hmm.
you're thinking of platform as a service, you would think of Azure. When you're thinking of big data projects, then you're thinking of Google Cloud. Like in the industry has already noticed that there are certain things that these cloud providers are good for. So if you're a company which has a lot of data, it's a no-brainer for you to be using Google for those
Right, right,
projects.
right.
But
Yeah.
you might not use them for infrastructure because they're not known for that. AWS is a lot more mature over there. You can get a lot more granular control over your um, scaling groups, dynamic scaling, and all that. Whereas Google Group, they have that option, but they're not known for it because they're still working through the maturity. So that's the first misconception. The second misconception I would say is, which is unfortunately still there, is cloud is not secure. And the reality is, yes, it's not secure if you don't do it right, but it is absolutely secure if companies like Netflix, Capital One, I'm going to HashiCorp, like all these big companies, they for sure put a lot more, they have a lot more concern than, say, your little mom and pop shop on the side who's concerned about security in cloud. Because they definitely hold a lot more sensitive data. They definitely hold, like Capital One was a great example, where it's one of the largest banks in the US, completely on AWS. They have Azure, they have Google Cloud, um, but they're moving completely to cloud. They're not. They reason people trust the security of the cloud is because of so much has gone into this. So many people have trusted it. There's so many eyeballs on it that
Hmm.
even the smallest of things get picked up really quickly. That to me is a sign that, oh, if you do screw up, something would happen really quickly. Either you would get, I don't know, some kind of government action on it, or you would get the wrath of the general public on it on Twitter or whatever, wherever. But something would happen and someone would take action ASAP. If you go to a, I don't know, I don't want to use Alibaba or Oracle Cloud as an example. They're good clouds, right? But they're not mature enough and they have their own markets. But if you are like a small time player and you pay, I don't know, $1,000 per month, but that data just happens to be PII, like personal information, they would not care. Like, yeah, whatever, man. Just like I've got these giants over here who pay me 50K. Would I care about my 50K user or would I care about my $1,000 user? So with the smaller players, you're kind of in that space. At least with the bigger players like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, there are so many big players in it already. Outside of those, using those services, they will make sure that shit happens. So that's the second misconception. So that's why I feel if someone is still thinking that security is not something that they would trust on cloud, I definitely would ask them to revisit that conversation. The third one being, and this is my final one, is the fact that people think the security in cloud is the same as security in on-premise. It is same to some extent, but it's different. It's the same way when you secure your laptop, it's not the same way you would secure your data center. That's not the same way you secure your cloud. So people kind of need to understand the nuance of how security fundamentals are different in each of those different landscapes. So those are my three misconceptions.